will now call this meeting to order. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to adopt the final agenda?
I'll make a motion to adopt the final agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion does carry. Our next order of business is to adopt the minutes from the June 21st, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Excellent. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion does carry. Our first discussion item on our agenda tonight is item 3.1. Consider amendments to Victoria Zoning Code Section 20, off-street parking and loading. This item does include a public hearing. Before opening the public hearing, I'll now turn it over to Planner Isaac Peterson for staff presentation. Isaac?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, those that join us here this evening. Tonight for the Commission's consideration for recommendation will be a amendment to Zoning Code Section 20 Section 20, off-street parking and loading. Just a little context for what we're reviewing here. So as the Commission knows, and those in the audience know, based on some upcoming multifamily residential proposals, staff is recommending consideration of amendment to the residential parking requirements identified within the code. As the Commission knows, there was a discussion held on July 5th to review what a potential ordinance amendment could be, with some feedback and direction given by the Commission. So at that July 5th Planning Commission meeting, staff presented a draft proposal indicating code language requiring 1 parking space per bedroom for residential developments, multifamily residential developments. At that meeting, the Commission provided direction towards consideration of a 1.5 parking space requirement per dwelling unit, as opposed to that 1 space per bedroom requirement, along with consideration of additional parking spaces required for units with greater than 2 bedrooms. So just a little high-level overview of our existing code requirement for multiple family land uses in the city. Currently, city code requires 2 spaces per dwelling unit, one of the 2 to be enclosed for multifamily land uses. In addition, there's provision that there can be no reduction of that code requirement for straight zoning for residential land uses. And additionally, residential land uses within the CBD are required to provide parking spaces under the ownership of the applicant of a subject property within the CBD. So in application, we have some local examples of what that 2 space per dwelling unit parking requirement looks like, and really it's conducive towards a suburban model of growth that you see throughout the Twin Cities. Here's an example right across the street from us, kitty corner from City Hall, across Steiger Lake Lane, where we see some on surface parking located adjacent to multifamily buildings, along with a proportional amount of covered structure parking spaces that's spread over a greater land area. So the hiccup of what we're identifying with this 2 space per dwelling unit parking requirement, again, it does reflect that traditional suburban multifamily development pattern. Obviously, constraints are tight, and guidance is denser within the city's central business district. So when we're reviewing these applications across the board, there's a math problem with the actual land area and the parking that can be provided on site to support residential uses that are guided within the city. Staff has reviewed local and market examples of multifamily development, and identified that a successful metric that can be used to support residential development that deviates from the city's current requirement can be accomplished. So here are some of those examples, and I've also included one of the proposed developments that we'll be hearing later here this evening. Of course, there's multiple examples across the board here. None of these cities are exactly Victoria, and no market city is exactly like Victoria, but really what we see here, and there's a deviation from what was included within your packet for the Flats project, there's a range of parking on a unit basis that ranges from 1.4, 1.3 to 1.6 or so parking spaces per dwelling unit that multifamily residential projects are proposing. The local example that we have here, and the city doesn't have much historic growth on the multifamily front, would be the Flats project, which provided a ratio of 1.32 parking stalls per dwelling unit. So again, here's the Flats kind of in comparison land area wise to what the current city code guides towards and what was approved for the Flats through a PUD. With it for that Victoria Flats project, it was an 81 unit apartment building that contained 101 bedrooms. And the PUD approval for the Flats project allowed for 1 parking space per bedroom as a base requirement, with 6 additional visitor parking spaces adjacent to or on the site. So that would be a total of 107 resident parking spaces to serve the building. There's also 37 public parking spaces co-located on site, as it was originally partially a city parking lot initially. This parking lot was studied in 2019. At that time, through the parking study utilization counts, there wasn't a perceived impact to the public parking spaces on site adjacent to the residential land use, and it was observed to be underutilized or below 75% utilization for all observed hours. Staff has, since our initial conversation here, contacted the Victoria Flats management to discuss the operations of their parking facilities and what they're observing. And some of that feedback that was provided was that the units in the Flats, the 81 units that are there, are 100% occupied currently. And they historically have been occupied anywhere from 90 to 100%. On average, the observation is that there's 6 to 10 cars parked in the lot overnight. That's consistent with the approval for the Flats project, which allowed for 10 surface parking stalls located on the lot here, and then 6 visitor parking stalls on the north side. The observation was also that the 6 visitor parking spaces are predominantly used on the weekends. So moving forward here, based on the Commission's feedback comment that we've heard from the public, the proposed ordinance amendment would provide for 1.5 parking spaces per bedroom for dwelling. Sorry, that's not struck, per dwelling unit, plus 0.5 spaces for each unit containing 3 bedrooms or more. The proposed language also does include a provision to allow for the utilization of shared parking as a conditional use permit. And I'll touch base on that here as well. And then again, for consistency, proposed amendment to section 20-7, noting the requirements of section 20-6. So the impetus behind the proposed provision to allow for shared parking with these multifamily residential projects is solely to provide a mechanism to promote the development of additional shared parking capacity and spaces through residential redevelopment and development, based on what we're seeing and observing and hearing. To do so, and for a property or a project to utilize shared parking, it would be required to be reviewed on an individual review basis, with consideration to a parking demand model or study, parking management plan, and a shared parking agreement with the city. So I'm gonna pull up two examples here of developments that the city or the Planning Commission, City Council has looked at or will look at. The first that I pull up here is the city's Downtown West project. We'll go more in depth on this on our next agenda item, but I want to show the full scope of the project area and the guidance and the concept plan that's been guided for this area. The highlighted area here, we have proposed site phase 1 of the Downtown West project. And this concept guidance that has been relayed as the direction for the development of the property proposed a residential facility or apartment project here in the phase 1 project area, with shared parking co-located on the site in the central green area to serve the adjacent land uses, such as the apartment building shown on the south here where it says proposed site. So moving back, this was the concept vision that was evaluated through a feasibility study with parking metrics to support that the facility would be served. Upon review in looking at what our current code is, and this project is not being brought forward as a PUD to conform with our straight zoning, to accommodate the city's existing parking requirement of 2 spaces per 1 dwelling unit. About an acre of private parking dedicated solely to the surface lot parking dedicated solely to the building, or 93 parking spaces would be needed, along with parallel parking spaces that would presumably have to be dedicated to the sole use of this apartment building, and then an additional 177 underground private parking stalls would be dedicated to the use of the building. So that'd be a total of 292 parking stalls to support a 145 unit apartment building. And this is where the comment and the note of the usable land area and the extent in which surface parking would be required to be dedicated solely to the use of a private function is coming into play. Through this potential proposed ordinance, there would be the ability to both serve proposed development while also securing additional shared parking through redevelopment or development. So the proposal that you see before you is the contrast to that could be accommodated through the proposed ordinance amendment, where parallel shared parking stalls would be utilized to support the function of the building, along with the utilization of 13 shared parking stalls within the central green area to support the building, with the additional 177 underground private parking stalls that are anticipated to be needed for the building. This proposal goes above and beyond what the anticipated demand for a residential apartment building would be. It really would be a belt and suspenders approach to serving the building and avoiding parking issues in the future. On the contrary, we have our Gannon property concept plan that was recently reviewed by the Planning Commission and discussed at length by the council, and there's been a lot of comment and feedback based on that plan, which is a concept plan. So at the time of that concept plan proposal, 73 residential units or apartment units were proposed on the site. The concept plan itself proposed that 93 parking spaces would be proposed to be used or utilized to serve the residential land use on the site, which would be 1.27 spaces per dwelling unit. So based on the current code requirement, 146 parking spaces would be needed to support that residential land use, or 2 spaces per dwelling unit. The proposed code requirement, which is above what the concept plan proposed, would require 110 spaces for the residential land use, or 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. For that project, and it's been relayed, and I'll say it here publicly, the utilization of shared parking to serve the residential land uses is not requested by the applicant of that project, nor would it be recommended for future consideration by city staff. So consideration of utilizing shared parking would be needed to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis and a site-by-site basis due to the density of what is proposed at that location and the utilization of shared parking, and the goal of that project to secure more shared parking. Staff would not recommend pursuing that for that project if it advanced. The last direction for that concept plan was to review the parking demand, receive a parking demand study and do more evaluation of parking for that site to inform what that concept design would be and if potential redevelopment of that site is viable at all. So that's kind of my high-level overview, Mr. Chair. Just as a comment that this item does require a public hearing. Notice of the published public hearing was included in the July 14th edition of the Chan Villager. There was an error at the time of posting that bumped the required public notice to the July 14th edition of the Chan Villager from the July 7th edition of the Chan Villager. So to ensure that we're maintaining consistency with the 10-day public hearing notice requirement, staff is advising that the comment period for the public hearing remain open until July 25th to allow that extra time for public comment and maintain consistency with the notice period. So the Planning Commission will be required to hear all comments provided during that period and then convene a meeting to review that comment if provided on July 25th at 4:30 or 5 p.m. Hear the comment and then close the public hearing from there. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you, and I can stand for any questions.
Very good. Thank you very much, Isaac. Yes, we will open a public hearing. A couple of comments concerning the public hearing is that the Planning Commission, I always define us as the research arm for the City Council. So what we do is hopefully all of the research and then present our findings to the City Council, and then the City Council responds accordingly. So we are here to make things happen within the confines of what we have to work with. But one other thing is with the city and all of the development that's going on, and I define Victoria as the city of lakes, city of parks, and the city of cars. So the pesky thing is the cars. Is there anyone in the chamber this evening who wishes to comment on this item? If so, please speak at the podium and state your name and address, please.
Mr. Chair, if you could just to state that the public hearing is now open, and then Mary can take the wheel.
Yep, the public hearing is now occurring.
Thank you, Planning Commissioners, for allowing us to speak. When we walked over today from our offices, it was fun to see that on a Tuesday evening, the park... Oh, I'm sorry. Mary Mavison. Do you want anything else?
Your address, please.
And your address, too, please,
Yeah,
Mary.
my office is 1750 Tower Boulevard. Also have a residential home over at Steger Lake, 1776.
Thank you.
Walking on over, we saw that the streets and the parking lots were full on a Tuesday night, and that's very, very exciting. In the previous parking study that Isaac had talked about that was done in 2019, that study was fantastic because it showed how all the different parking lots were really being fully utilized during the peak parking hours, like Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays. They were red or yellow, 85 to 100% full during your peak. So it's exciting to know that that's working. The question tonight about changing the ordinance to 1.5, or is the question also 1.5 plus at the last planning commission meeting about adding guest parking, or 1.5 and the 15% of shared parking, or tonight it's talked about the proposed parking. So there's a few different things happening. The city council at the last meeting, they said that they were going to authorize a public parking study to see where we were at today. And they went ahead and they authorized that. And we're just hoping that before you make an ordinance change that's very significant, that we allow that public parking study to happen in the downtown, see where we're at. It was done prior to even Winchester and Rye coming on board. We've got a new owner at the Victoria House. We'd like to find out, you know, we haven't had that, hasn't been open for 2 years. So it'd be nice for this new parking study to get us up to a current. With the new developments that are coming in, it looks like the ones that we can see, or the word on the street with the ones that have sales, we're going to be looking at 450 to 500 new residents coming in. We really, and when I say we, the business owners, the landowners, don't feel that we've had enough time to make sure that this ordinance change is right for all of the downtown. We don't know. Maybe for out by the Dairy Queen might work great. You got 13.5 acres, you got room for mistakes. But to shoehorn something in the shared parking in the central business district, we're kind of wondering how many shared parking spots do we have? How many are at full capacity? How much more could we put on them? Are we bleeding the businesses dry of parking? That's where we're hoping the shared parking ordinance will help out, and the study of the parking. Just a couple more items, and then I'll be done. The current shared parking in the central business district. So maybe not out at the flats, maybe not out at Leitner's, maybe not out at KA, but in the central business district where you want retail, offices, shops, it is at full capacity, and I think the parking study will show that it's exceeding its capacity, and you need capacity to add more shared parking. You have to have capacity. We don't think that it's there, but we'd like to find out in the parking study. We hope for public engagement before you change the ordinance. We do want to make sure that we know that on the flats, on the example that Isaac gave, there was one more component to that, and that was that the flats were given, they used 1.2 million of TIF is supposed to go for future downtown parking. So that's in addition. That's an important point to note. We know that the Victoria residents are dependent on cars out here because we don't have mass transit. So we know we want to study and take a look at that with the parking. And we want great success. And we're hoping that tonight you don't vote on this ordinance change because we think it has, we'd like to study it more. We'd like to look at the parking, where we're at today. There might be different zones within the city that can have shared parking, but some areas are already sold out and they've been resold numerous times. And so just in trying to put things together for tonight, you know, you start diving in and looking at it and trying to analyze. I think more time needs to happen. I think that if something has to happen, an exception for KA, because you're starting fresh, make it an exception. But a full ordinance change, which is going to have an impact on the entire development of all these residential homes that are coming in. Are we trying to get more mixed use? Are we going to be a city of solid residential spots? We really need to look at that. And the businesses, we want to thrive, and we want the residents to come in and feel like they can park. And we think it just takes more time, and we'd like to be part of that. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Thank you for your input on that. Thank you for the documentation that you provided us with also. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on the subject?
Good evening, Commissioners. Tom Wortman, Victoria Borough, 7999 Victoria Drive. And I'd just like to second a lot of what Mary pointed out tonight with the aspect of the council just putting into a parking study update. I was part of the parking study that was done in 2018-19 as a committee member. And I think with the changes that have happened, the upcoming changes that are going to be happening, as Mary mentioned, there's 4 or 5 sites besides the KA site out on the Dairy Queen property that are looking at apartments besides just the site that Carl Runk has brought up that is of concern from the standpoint of the existing peak time traffic that happens on that peak times, especially in downtown Thursday, Friday, Saturdays. And the idea that our customers are complaining about parking spaces and complaining about maybe not coming back because if they can't find a parking spot, it's tough, especially in winter. It's one thing to walk around on a nice summer night in the downtown area, but when we've got 6 months of winter and inclement weather, it makes it a lot more difficult. And so I think it's hugely important that we look at what's being done, what the changes could be, and how shared parking works in the central business district versus perhaps on the 13.5 acres out by the Dairy Queen location. I think that it is important that there is a distinction between downtown central business parking and its peak times of overflow and needs, and potentially in some of the other areas. So I encourage you to, again, let's see what this parking study can evaluate, have more public input on it so that we can deal for the long-term future of the city, because it's important to us business people that are here and fighting for our lives after 2 years of COVID and the pandemic, which really was not a very good scene in town. For us, in 2020, we were closed for 5 months. I mean, you can't operate a business too long when you're closed half of the year. So appreciate your input and your thoughts and the idea that we can look forward to see what results we can learn and understand in clarity from an updated parking study. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Tom. Appreciate it. Yeah, in terms of the public hearing, that will reconvene Monday afternoon at 4:30. So there will not be a decision coming out tonight on this at the same time. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this?
Thank you. I'm Terry Hartman with Hartman Communities, and between my brother and myself, we own the Clock Tower building, the Main Street building, the Noderman building, and the Lakeside building. So my address is 1750 Tower Boulevard here in Victoria. Thanks for letting us know that there wouldn't be a decision tonight. I mean, it's helpful to hear what the other property owners have to say. And I wouldn't want to repeat everything that they're saying. I would like to add that this is a difficult task for you. I watched the video of your last meeting, and you struggled with this, and I think it's a struggle yet to try to do a one-size-fits-all ordinance number, because I think it does apply differently to the 13.5 acres where the KA project is going to be proposed. And it also applies differently to the Victoria Flats project, which was compared to the used as a comparison in this crafting your formula. It's a very different site. The Victoria Flats property was proposed in a really low density use, existing parking lot, and I think what's come out of it is a successful combination of parking spaces, not using what you're proposing, but something less. But it also proposed some additional rebuilding of parking spaces that were on the street. They did their own underground spaces, and they also rebuilt a public parking space on the back of it. And I don't know that those 39 units in that public parking lot was included in the comparison metric that you're really comparing. So it does reach almost the 2 parking spaces per unit that the ordinance required. And in addition, Mary touched on it, because I was there the night when we approved it. People were concerned about the ratio being reduced. But when you added the 1.2 million in TIF, 25% of the TIF fund goes to the city, dedicated to be used for additional public parking expansion. With that, I don't know how much of it was completely spent already, but as evidence, Tiger Lake Lane was improved with 25 more spaces on top of those numbers. And I believe, are we using some of that TIF for the Tiger Lake Lane West project or any other parking expansions that you're aware of?
I'll answer your question, but I'll let you finish speaking, and then we'll come back to it afterwards.
So I don't know that the comparison is that you were trying to craft this against was exactly right for that Victoria Flats, but it was close. I think there's another 39 units that needs to be looked at if you were going to look at the study of that to say, does it work or does it not work? What's been the experience over the last couple of years? And that 1.2 million can't be forgotten about. That was dedicated to be used for expansion of public parking and has been used for that purpose. So again, I think you got two or three different parts of the city where this kind of one size fits all needs to work, and it may be difficult. The parking study component of this is a really important thing. Most of us are concerned not about the KA proposal or anything in the 13.5 acres. We're more concerned about what the impact is to the shared parking spaces. Most of our buildings are predicated on the use of that site. So when we lose parking spaces, our businesses suffer. And if that's the case, then we have a diminution of value in our buildings. It's like an inverse condemnation. And that's a pretty serious thing for our values, our financing, our bankers, pretty concerned about all that. So I won't repeat the rest of what Mary and Tom have said, but I appreciate being able to see the parking study as soon as we can, so you guys know you're making the right decision as it applies to the downtown properties.
Very good. Thank you, Terry. Appreciate your perspective on the history that's involved, because there's a fair amount of history that we need to truly make the right decision at the same time. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on the subject?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Tim Marco, 3340 Republic Avenue, St. Louis Park. I'm a development director for Anderson Companies, and I'm one of the principals of Marco McLean Development. Full disclosure, we're the next agenda item, which directly relates to this agenda item. But I thought maybe I could add a couple of comments, just hearing the public's comments and Isaac's reading as well. We share the same parking concerns as the members of the public. We want to make sure that our facility has the appropriate amount of parking stalls. We don't have the luxury of repositioning our asset. Once we build an apartment community, it's an apartment community. If we've underparked it, people won't live there, right? If you don't have enough space to park your cars, to live where you want to live, you find somewhere else to live. So we go through a very specific data-driven approach to how many is the appropriate amount of stalls, especially when we're not downtown Minneapolis or St. Paul, connected to the light rail, where you can get away with more surface parking because it's abundant, right? You can park a few blocks away. People are okay with that. They're familiar with it, even in the wintertime. Out here, we use, and we provided that, I believe, in our traffic memo, or our parking memo that we put together, the ITE, the industry standard for the demand for parking based on uses. In addition, we use our third-party management company, feedback from other apartment communities as well. You can look in Minnetonka. Isaac put the list of 5 or 6 up there that show the similar demand, right? I mean, what we show is that about 1 per bedroom is the industry standard. Whether you're in Victoria, whether you're in Prior Lake, whether you're in Minnetonka, potentially Woodbury, it seems to match, right? It's proven out by data, other developers, communities work. In this situation, we're asking for more shared parking stalls to meet the potential code of 1.5 plus the 0.5 rider, whatever the specific math was. I think one thing that is, like I said, worth noting, we have nothing to gain by shorting parking stalls in Victoria, right? We will seriously be detrimental to the success of our asset long term. The one thing I heard, and I'd ask Isaac to confirm, to just maybe bring a little bit of potential comfort to downtown business owners, is if the amendment to the ordinance reads that any shared parking is part of a conditional use permit in the future, that allows the Planning Commission, the City Council, to be intentional and deliberate on when that's appropriate and where. So if it makes sense out by the Dairy Queen and the Downtown West project, that's a certain circumstance. If it makes sense downtown in the central business district, that's its own circumstance. Otherwise, you meet the demand you need for the 1.5 and you move forward. Again, based on the ITEs and our feedback, we find that it's about 1.3-ish. That's what the math works out to on 1 per bedroom. But thought I'd add those components in there as part of your consideration and just some feedback for the public based on the comments. So, thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, I mean, this is neighbors that are going to have to figure out how to work together, and now is the time to do that, so that it does work. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this?
I am Scott Gates. I'm at 4363 Wilshire. I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of Paul Carlson, who couldn't make it tonight at VIX. I mean, I pretty much agree with the things that have been set up to this point. There's a bigger picture here. I think the key point is this is the cart before the horse. 1.5, 1.3, 1.4 might be perfectly reasonable. That's, as you noted, IT standard. It's a standard you see in other areas, but there's more to that. You get into trip generation, you get into the dynamics of the area, central business district versus surrounding areas, those types of things. All those things cooperate together to create a bigger scenario. And the council, as I understand it, has identified the need for the data to make those decisions. That would be a traffic study. Last one was done in 2019, as I understand it. It sounds like it was potentially done just for Victoria Flats. One of my suggestions was, in a meeting we had last week with the developers, that an AUAR is probably appropriate, that you look at traffic from a area-wide picture and how this 400 to 500 new residents, and probably honestly more on top of that, works with each other, with the existing residential, and with the existing business. So again, it's a bigger picture that needs to be addressed. We're kind of down here at the end game talking about standards and specifications, which might be perfectly acceptable, but you really need the data to be able to do that. This would be considered an urban style development. I think that's been maybe identified versus a suburban style. And one of the keys to that typically is walkability. So you've got a good walkable community, but the missing component to urban style is transit, as Tim alluded to. Without transit, the kind of urban traffic component goes away, in that everybody still's got to have cars. And if you've got a car, you're going to typically use it. Most people aren't going to walk from a peripheral project even 2-3 blocks away to get downtown. They're going to, it's who we are. We're going to get in our cars, we're going to go to town. So that creates a significant additional impact on the central business district, which is an amenity for the entire community. It's, as they noted, I walked through tonight too, there was 4 or 5 parking spaces available on a Tuesday at 6 o'clock. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that's a much more difficult scenario. I think this gets down to developing standards as well. Tim alluded to that as well. As I've read it, there's some ambiguity. For example, using shared parking, it's like, well, you can use a portion of that, but it doesn't identify what that standard is. You can't have a standard that says a portion of, because then it's not reproducible. There's no certainty. You can't treat similarly situated properties differently. That's all part of this discussion, how you identify what those standards are, so that a developer can walk in and have some certainty when they design. The residents can have some certainty. The businesses can plan their businesses accordingly. I think, and this is more just me maybe, but when you're talking about shared parking, you know, maybe a quick update on what that means. Who's paying for the shared parking? Is the developer paying for the shared parking in these cases and then making it available to the community? And if so, is the community likely to use that shared parking? And then I think the last point is the, you know, when you get into the TIF funding, you know, how is that going to work? How is it going to be allocated? I guess one other related traffic point too is in discussing this Monarch project, which I think everybody was generally in support of. They weren't in support of the parking situation with that. The intent, as I understand it with the TIF, is to increase shared parking, and it really doesn't do that when you get down to it and work through the numbers. When you're talking about parking, I'm a developer as well, and we always are creative, let's just say. It's just how it works. When you're a city, you don't want to be creative because you have finite demand. You have peak demands that you have to work to accommodate. And maybe one of the last things on that, looking at the Monarch project as it maybe relates to this discussion, you can replace parking with additional parking, but they're not always apples for apples. Currently you have a 45 units, something like that, surface parking. Everybody knows where it is, everybody knows how to find it. People that come to town, even if they're not residents, they're visitors, they can find that shared parking. If you put that shared parking in an underground garage that's part of a residential structure, downtown Minneapolis, and part of a residential structure that as it's presented is multiple levels, multiple entrances. It's not drive in here, drive out there. The people that come, even the people in town have a hard time understanding that that's shared public parking. People that come in from out of town, it's even harder yet. You know, downtown Minneapolis, they can get away with it because people are used to it. Again, usually single entrances, single exits, but does that parking have the same value from a use standpoint as a surface parking lot? Not saying surface is great, but anyway, those are some of the things to consider. I would also encourage that this is a discussion that is ahead of the game a little bit. It would seem far better to get the traffic study, and it should be an AUR, I think, with input from the business community, residents, and the development community. Identify the data and then come back and work back through these and see how it all works together. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you very much, Scott. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on the topic? You will have another opportunity on Monday afternoon, but now is also an opportunity. Or any additional thoughts that anyone may have?
Really, I know you technically need the Monday meeting, but I mean, given what I'm hearing and the desire to have the traffic study, that's not going to change between now and
No.
Monday. We can't rule on deferring to the parking study for the central business district, handle the other development on its own.
Chair, members of the commission, if I may just interject, what I'd recommend that the commission do is, you've heard public comment. I don't believe anyone else wishes to speak. You can hold the public hearing or put a pause button on it. Resume commission discussion. The commission can make a recommendation. Of course, you would, at this evening's meeting. However, you have to hear all public comment, and if you make a recommendation this evening and hear further comment, you have to consider that and potentially revoke that recommendation, make a new recommendation. So you
hard for me to believe that additional comments are going to be, yeah, let's do this without the study. That's I guess that's my point.
So yeah, correct. Chair, members of the commission, I think just a couple of points here for the commission's clarification. So the council did refer staff to pursue updated a parking study specific to the Gannon property at their last meeting on Monday, and then in addition, the city undertaking updated utilization counts of the central business district. We have, and I'd add the following point, and I believe it may be consistent with the comments that are being presented here this evening. If the commission is concerned or wants to discuss concern regarding parking as a whole within the central business district and receive more information, you can certainly do that. If there is a desire by the commission, because we have a second agenda item this evening that relies, and there's two different outcomes that could occur from this discussion as it relates to the Downtown West Phase 1 project. The commission could discuss incorporating language within the proposed ordinance to make it site specific to the Downtown West project area. And we could certainly bring back language that could accommodate that. Alternatively, as it relates to the Downtown West Phase 1 project area, the alternative would be to accommodate the parking requirement of the city. Yeah, I mean, what my recommendation would be, if there's an appetite to allow for a reduced parking metric consistent with what's being proposed here this evening, to make it site specific to the Downtown West area and not necessarily the rest of the central business district, noted by the concern brought before you here this evening.
Has Downtown West been rezoned as central business district at this point, or is it still ag?
Commissioner Pedersen, chair, members of the commission, it's zoned within the central business district. Language could be incorporated within the zoning code to refer to a zone or area within the central business district that a ordinance applies to.
I think it makes sense to have two central business districts. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but Central Business District 1, Central Business District 2, and have different language for each.
Then you're going to get into the business district down south and 10 and 11. And what's that considered zoned? South of the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
I do think it needs a lot more work, quite frankly. I think there's been a certain amount of work that has been done. I think the public input is to me is all important. I think there were some very valuable things. I think at this point we discuss, we debate, and I think it is part. Correct me if I'm wrong, Isaac, that we are legally scheduled for the Monday afternoon, 25th. Has that been published?
Chair, members of the commission, that was published and noticed for this public hearing.
Okay. So that we have to hold to, no matter what.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Any other input on this before Monday afternoon? Hearing none, we will.
Chair, members of the commission, if I may, before you close the item, what staff would ask for, because we have a potential development that would rely on potential code amendment to the ordinance, is to provide some direction to that end on where to take this next and if there is an appetite to consider that as a separate item or area, yeah, providing direction to that end.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, if we were in the vicinity of Highway 10 and Highway 11, we would have, in theory, about all the parking that we would need. In the central business district, of course, we don't, and that's a whole nother set of parameters, a whole nother formula that really has to be put together. So, I think that's a very, very valid point.
I would think that, yeah, we would probably look at 13.5 acres different than downtown area, just because to me they're two different areas. Mm-hmm. You get into stuff we haven't talked about, which are EV spots, and you start putting EV spots in central business district, and are those spots restricted to electric vehicles only, or are they open to anybody, and all of a sudden now you're restricting some more parking spots for electric vehicles that, or do you have enough EV spots? How many EV spots are you going to require per parking lot? Just like handicap, you got to require, so many spots per size of lot. What's our requirement going to be on EV requirements? And, are you going to require infrastructure to be put in that will require half the lot to be at some point EV? I don't know what the answer is there. But I think, yes, I agree that we need to wait and see what the parking study says, but I think also that the 13.5 acres is a different animal or a different area than mm-hmm. downtown. And I would say we could probably move forward as two separate areas. However you want to, I think it can be done separately, if that's what you're looking for.
Aren't there already other zoning provisions that are different for the downtown area than they are for other parts of Victoria? So this wouldn't really be unprecedented.
Commissioner Schwarting, chair members of the commission, there are various code provisions within zoning districts found throughout the city that differ based on the location. Nothing quite like what we're talking about here, but ranging from the use of different lakes for different things, found commonly within the same zoning district, you name it. What I would recommend, if the Planning Commission has an appetite to do it, would be to consider revised draft code language noting an area within the downtown west site with a graphic or description of what the allowable area is, to consider a revised parking requirement for just that area. That would give the opportunity for the commission and council to hear updated utilization counts for the remainder of the central business district.
Well, I would be supportive of tabling this item, going back with another look in a future commission meeting of the language as proposed, because from my recollection of our last meeting, this doesn't quite hit the mark of where we were going. I mean, just on a quick high-level hit, the language about plus an additional half space for each unit containing 3 bedrooms or more. I think if that were 2 bedrooms or more, we start to get closer to where we were before, but addressing the concept that for the trend of development producing more 1-bedroom and studio apartments, that would We wanted to lighten up that end of the spectrum on the number of spaces for those units while keeping balance as the number of units or bedrooms per unit increases, that we're increasing the parking spaces. And I don't feel this, as drafted, addresses that. And I think another concern is that we wanted to get the input of Commissioners Murray and Moore, who are not here tonight and who are not at the last meeting, blended with the public comment that we've heard. I think it's incumbent on our commission to put this aside for the moment, come back with a fresh set of look, bring into the topic of the parking study, and then we can address the current development and its parking spaces as a separate item, and then address the additional question of how do we deal with the shared parking in the central business district and maybe shared parking outside of the central business district. I feel that shared parking is really the crux of the hang-up between the business owners and central business district, and then multifamily development what is sort of outside this, what we've traditionally felt is a central business district.
Is that a view that's shared?
What's the plan for downtown west development if we don't make an ordinance change? I mean, is there like a PUD process they'd have to go through in order to get it done, or what does that entail? Sorry.
Commissioner Pedersen, Chair, members of the Commission, we're in almost uncharted waters, but there's a few different outcomes that the Commission could pursue. The Downtown West Phase 1 proposal relies on this proposed ordinance language. So option would be that the city could, the Commission, and it doesn't sound like there's an appetite to do so, could consider recommending approval of the proposed ordinance amendment, and the Phase 1 site would conform to the amended code. We've discussed briefly specifying the location of a shared parking count to be site specific to the 13.5 acres. So that's option 2. Option 3 would be the Commission recommend denial of the proposed ordinance amendment. Tabling the item for a future date would in many ways just be a vote of denial for the 13.5 acres Phase 1 development, because it doesn't conform. For the site itself that the Commission will be reviewing at our next agenda item, the Commission could recommend that if there isn't an appetite to conform with that code, the Commission could recommend that if there's a comfort level with the parking that was provided on site and staff feels comfortable that the site in that situation in that given area will serve that building effectively, the Commission could consider a recommendation, because it would be a break from the code that the city has on the books, consideration of a variance from the existing code to meet the required or meet the parking that's specified on site. That would be heard at a later meeting date, or denial of the site as a whole, or and we'll get into this when we review the project, there could be consideration that the public parking spaces that are shown on the development, and I'll pull it up here, be dedicated to the private use of the building or the development as a whole, and be platted with the building and not be utilized for shared parking. So
are
we complicated?
Are we in agreement as a commission that we do want to table the amendment? We do want to proceed with the Downtown West and the parking that was proposed.
With this proposed building, we want to hear the proposal, and we're very receptive to the parking that is being proposed for it.
Yep.
The variance, maybe that's the easiest way to do it. I don't know. But we want to hear the proposal, and we're very receptive to the parking that is being proposed for it. Yep.
So, are we in agreement as a commission that we do want to
but we're amendable. We'd like to hear it.
Well, worst case scenario.
We're not ready to change the ordinance, right?
No.
I was just going to say, worst case scenario, the green space to the north becomes an entire parking lot to satisfy the parking needs. Wouldn't that be the worst case scenario that we're trying to avoid?
Commissioner Pedersen, Chair, members of the Commission, that is an excellent question. Okay, so as we look at this, there is a central green space that's been identified within the concept plan for downtown West, and really, we'll get into this more in our next agenda item, but the driver behind identifying that central green space area was to serve as more shared parking for downtown West as a whole. So, I mean, the catch-22 that we're grappling with and the driver behind considering an ordinance amendment for a project like this and to facilitate a project like this is how do we secure more shared public parking spaces if we believe it works? Is the right direction to identify we need this as a shared or a private parking lot to support a development like this? Or is there a function and an ability in a development proposal like this where shared parking can be used for both the public good and to serve an adjacent building site? You know, I would tend to agree there's a million ways to skin a cat here, and each site is completely unique and different. One of the benefits to the design of an area like this is that there have been traffic studies done, there has been feasibility studies done, and there has been parking design and counts done for redevelopment of this size and proportion to ensure that the infrastructure, such as parking that's designed in conjunction with the building site, serves the building appropriately. So we'll talk about that in depth later. I guess to sum up what I'm hearing from the Commission, there is not an appetite or there's an appetite to table consideration of an ordinance amendment. And then for the upcoming agenda item, we'll discuss the parking in a little bit more in depth, and we have the engineer here with us this evening and the applicants that can discuss it. Potentially consideration of a variance in conjunction with the development. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. Are we in agreement on that? Any opposed?
Yes.
Yep. That's how we'll proceed.
You can, Chair, members of the Commission, you could move to table the item until.
Is there a motion to table?
July 25th, presumably, will be the next time to discuss it.
Pardon?
You could table it until July 25th, which we have scheduled to discuss it, irregardless of the outcome of this evening.
Table it until July 25th at 4:30. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to table this agenda item to the July 25th, and then with a view to incorporate the potential draft languages that we discussed during this meeting.
Is there a second to that?
I second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion does carry. Thank you. Our next discussion item on our agenda tonight is item 3.2. Consider preliminary plat, conditional use permit applications, and site plan approval for Anderson Company's proposed downtown West multifamily residential development. This item does include a public hearing. Before we open the public hearing, I will now turn it over to planner Isaac Peterson for a staff presentation. Isaac?
Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission.
Before we go on, did we properly close the public hearing?
Close till Monday.
Commissioner Vansky.
Or is our motion to table it also close the public?
Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the Commission. So you're not actually closing the public hearing, rather it's remaining open. until July 25th. Anyone wishing to supply further comment between now and that time can certainly do so. I have not experienced this in my young planning career, although it's not an uncommon thing. Unfortunately, occasions arise where there isn't a appropriate notice, or there's a failure to notice by the appropriate agency. That wasn't city related, so I hope that
But it has to be done right.
correctly.
So,
All right, Chair, members of the Commission. So our second agenda item here this evening is preliminary plat, conditional use permit, and site plan consideration for Anderson Company's proposed downtown west multifamily residential development. So just highlighting where we're looking here, and I would guess that most folks in the room and the Commission and many of us involved are familiar with this site. So the downtown west area includes two parcels. The west on Steiger Lake Lane on the furthest extent of the city's central business district. We see County Road 11 here, Highway 5. We say over by the Dairy Queen because the Dairy Queen's right here. And we're looking at the city-owned property noted in orange here, and then the Boyer property noted in blue here. So in totality, this downtown west area is 14.17 acres in size. And tonight what we're going to be reviewing is a proposed 145-unit multifamily apartment building on 2.13 acres of this site. So just kind of running through the timeline here, and some of it's almost as old as me. But currently the city owns 13.5 acres, 13.53 acres. It's the orange parcel that I noted west of downtown that's referred to as the downtown west property, or the 13.5 acre piece. That property was acquired as part of a land swap with Three Rivers Park District in the early 2000s. And really since 2006, the city has been going through a constant evaluation for potential development of the property to really serve as an extension of the existing downtown central business district core area. So in 2016, the City Council adopted a downtown master plan, which guided the 13.5 acres as an extension of the mixed-use nature downtown here that would incorporate commercial, office, and retail and residential uses throughout the site's total area. So moving on from there, in 2020 or January of 2020, the City Council authorized infrastructure feasibility study to review potential street alignments, site grading, access, stormwater management, trail and sidewalk alignments, public utility extensions, along with providing recommendation on the site's project phasing to review development for the site as a whole over time. So coming out of that feasibility study, there was a concept plan that was noted that identified a few different project phase areas, and really coming off of Steiger Lake Lane here, indicating the desire to relocate Steiger Lake Lane through the property to County Road 11 to facilitate development, incorporate stormwater elements, incorporate quite a bit of shared public parking throughout the site, to really serve the site and function from a fresh start and knowing where we're going. So moving from that feasibility study in October of 2021, the City Council authorized a preliminary development agreement with Kraus Anderson on the proposed Phase 1 project area portion of downtown west. That Phase 1 project area included the construction of a market rate apartment building, as well as public amenities such as the central green space that we just discussed, stormwater features to serve the site and initiate site development, along with roadways and utility infrastructures to serve the site. So moving from that, The concept plan in that feasibility study was then refined to align with potential development. It's pretty close to what the feasibility study noted, but it noted that the phase 1 area here is generally shown in red in the outlined area, and then the future development of the site as a whole. So we're looking at the phase 1 portion of the site noted in red here. So in May of 2022, the preliminary development agreement was assigned by Krause Anderson to Anderson Companies to bring that same project forward and bring a development application forward. So currently what we're reviewing here tonight is Anderson Companies' submittal of a preliminary plat application along with conditional use permit applications for consideration by the Planning Commission and City Council to kick off the development of Downtown West with a 145 unit market rate apartment development located on the property. So again, this is the project area and building that's being reviewed here tonight as it relates to the concept plan that was anticipated. So currently, and I'm sure we've all driven past the development or the property area, the city-owned property is shown here, and really it exists as open space. It was a part of Three Rivers at one point. It's a field with trees kind of sparsely populated out there. There's no structures located on the city property currently. And then the Boyer property, which is shown within the application here this evening, contains a single-family home. It's historically been rented out as a single-family rental along with 2 outbuildings. So currently, within the 2040 comp plan, the area is guided as downtown mixed use. And the downtown mixed use guidance supports a continuation of the mix of uses within the CBD, including residential, smaller scale retail, office buildings, and other uses coalescing together in the same area. The residential density guidance for the downtown mixed use area is 24 to 75 units per acre. The proposal here this evening is 68.3 residential units per acre as proposed. Currently, the property is zoned within the CBD, Central Business District. Residential land uses within the Central Business District require consideration as a conditional use. In addition, building heights are restricted within the Central Business District to 35 feet unless a conditional use permit is granted to exceed that requirement. So that's also the request here before you this evening, which notes the building that we're looking at is 44 feet in height. So the lots and plats shown here for the preliminary plat note that the 2 properties would be combined and redivided into a Lot 1, Block 1, which would be proposed for the development of the apartment building that's proposed. Outlot B, which would be retained by the city to facilitate stormwater and right-of-way street improvements, infrastructure improvements within the outlot. And Outlot A, which would be retained by the city to facilitate future development for the envisioned Downtown West project. So the plat looks like this. We can see the dashed line of the Boyer property. So this Lot 1, Block 1 would serve the apartment building. Outlot B would serve that central green area and the stormwater ponding to serve the site. And then Outlot A would be retained for future development noted within the concept plan. So with respect to the site plan that's before you this evening, the building shape is pretty consistent with the concept plan plans that have been reviewed leading to this point. It's located immediately adjacent to Steiger Lake Lane and would be served by Steiger Lake Lane and future expansion of Steiger Lake Lane. In the structure, again, next to Steiger Lake Lane, we're looking at 145 units within the apartment building, which consists of 1-bedroom and studio units, 104 of them, 38 2-bedroom units, and 4 3-bedroom units, for a total of 192 bedrooms located within the project structure area. So again, the structure that's being proposed before you this evening is 44 feet in height, or 4 stories. It includes 1 level of underground parking. The residential use and units are proposed on floors 1 through 4. With respect to the design of the building, and the rendering that you see before you here this evening is the initial elevations of what's proposed. The materials and colors used on the elevations of the structure appear to be consistent with the city's guidance and design standards for projects and buildings within this central business district. It does include articulation on all sides to break up the massing. In addition, there's the use of neutral tone paneling with consideration of the park district that's behind the property to minimize the visual effect of the building, along with brick, black metal cornice material, and stone on the corners. With respect to access, again, the site's proposed to be served to enter a underground parking ramp to serve the building from Steiger Lake Lane, shown here. And then in addition, the pedestrian entrance and kind of anchor of the building and amenity areas at the ground level is proposed to be located off the central green from Steiger Lake to be developed with the Downtown West Phase 1 project. So we just talked about parking, and let's talk about it again for this project, as what we're looking at here tonight. So included within your background packet was a parking demand study that staff requested, required for the review of the project. Through that parking demand study and reviewing the land use, the location, and where it is, 1.33 parking spaces were identified as necessary and needed to accommodate the parking demand of the building itself. 1.33 parking spaces per unit in the context of this building would be 194 total parking spaces. Currently what is proposed is 177 structured parking spaces beneath the building, and there's a request to utilize 43 of the 83 shared parking spaces that are proposed to be constructed through the development of the Downtown West Phase 1 project. That 43 count would be to get to a 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit count to serve the site and go above and beyond what's anticipated to be needed. And again, conform with the amendment that was proposed. Again, the staff feels comfortable with the parking demand study that was proposed, and based on the proximity of the area, the site location not being within the core central business district, utilization of the public spaces or the parallel parking spaces that are shown next to the building, due to their proximity and location that we're looking at here, the demand for utilization of those spaces, because there's no anticipated commercial development located in this area, it's Highway 5, it makes sense to serve the site through that. So as we discussed and as we're looking at that, some of the feedback from the commission and the discussion here this evening that staff will be requesting is if there's an appetite to do this, discussing what that looks like and what the anticipated requirement should be to serve this property and this project moving forward. With respect to utilities and stormwater, sewer and water services are anticipated to be served from Steiger Lake Lane through utility extensions that are created through the Steiger Lake Phase 1 project that was recently approved by council. And stormwater for serving the building and runoff is proposed to be collected by a stormwater pond located towards the entrance of the downtown west site. And really that infrastructure is proposed to serve the property as a whole. And then lastly, the property is located within the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. There's been ongoing coordination and activity together to ensure that the site as a whole and this project area is meeting the mark, and that's all trending positively. So again, staff is supportive of the proposed Downtown West Phase 1 preliminary plat, conditional use permit, and site plan applications. We do have some recommended conditions of approval. One being that the applicant shall enter into a development agreement with the city for the development of improvements prior to or concurrent with final plat approval, subject to the review of the city attorney and approval of the city council. That the applicant shall enter into a purchase agreement for the city-owned land proposed for the development, subject to the review of the city attorney and approval by the city council. That the final plat and related proposed subdivision of all existing parcels be approved by the city council prior to the requested conditional use permits taking effect. That the site plan and building materials be approved by the city council prior to the conditional use permit taking effect. That the applicant submit a parking management plan and enter into a shared parking agreement if shared parking spaces are utilized on the site, subject to the review of city staff and approval of the city council. That a building permit be obtained prior to proceeding with building construction, and all improvements comply with applicable building codes. Then lastly, that sign permits be obtained prior to the building's construction or installation of signage. So I would add, and this can be dependent on what's discussed here this evening by the commission and others, if there's a desire to consider the parking proposed on the site, that it be considered, or a recommended condition of approval be added for consideration of a variance to address parking on the proposed development site. So again, much like our public hearing, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, notice for this evening's public hearing was published in the July 14th edition of the Chan Villager. Similarly to our last item, to maintain that and maintain consistency with the 10-day public hearing notice requirement. The comment period for the public hearing must remain open until July 25th. And the Planning Commission must hear all comments between that period and convene a special meeting at the same time on the 25th to consider that comment and close the public hearing at that time. So with that, I can stand for any questions, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. We also have our development team here with us this evening that would be happy to answer any questions that you have and talk through the proposed project.
Very good. Thank you very much, Isaac. I will now open the public hearing. Is there anyone that would like to speak on the proposal? It's a public input. If there's someone that would like to speak on the proposal. If not, I'll close the...
Pause the public hearing until July 25th. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Pause it until the 25th. Okay, very good. I'll now open the floor to Planning Commission to discuss. Commissioners, any questions?
I have a question for the developer. So you've done the parking study, and say we grant the variance, but you do have to remember, can't walk to a grocery store, can't walk to your favorite beverage store, you can't walk to the Dairy Queen. So that's a plus. So but in some of the other examples, either bus service or I assume there's some walkability. So, but if we go with the 1.5 and then you encounter issues with rentability or tenants complaining about parking, what would your course of action be?
Chair, members of the Planning Commission, thank you for hearing us tonight. Let's get right into it, and we can do more of a formal presentation. Didn't know how you wanted to hear from us. I know we've been together for a couple years now, so we don't want to be redundant. Great question. We can do a little bit more color and context to, as it pertains specifically to our site, and maybe kind of historically how we get to our parking metrics. Because you're exactly right. The consequence and the outcome is unforgiving. There is no building additional parking. You know, the 2 years of planning and the architectural and everything that goes into it is fundamentally built around parking. When we start to evaluate a site, and it's all very case by case centric, the first thing we do is appropriately size the parking, and then we facilitate. Okay, is this project going to work based on how we can park it feasibly, or is it not? And more times than not, it's a project that doesn't work because of constraints, because of land use, because of land availability. And if it does not work for the parking, then we kind of move on. This particular case, just a little bit more history, and I'll ramble for a minute, has been interesting because we've been working in tandem with the vision that the city and the staff have had, and really trying to fit into the fabric of that vision of the master plan that we believed in. So, and we do believe in it, and so we wanted to, everything we've been doing for the last couple of years has been designing a site and sizing it and parking it so it fits into the character of that master plan, that ultimately fits into the character and emphasizes the natural beauty and activates the reserve and starts to bring some life to that side of downtown. And if done right, maybe not in the dead of winter, but on a nice night like tonight, we can get lucky enough where we're close enough to downtown where we can bring people into downtown to utilize the local businesses and establishments without necessarily needing that car, right? We're not going to rely on that. And from our perspective and the economics of how we evaluate it, we're much more dispassionate than that. So what we'll do is we'll start with IET data and technical manuals. We don't rely on that. Where we generally go first is to look at our own portfolio. And we have thousands of units within, core urban, some right on light rail, some right on BRT lines. We're starting to get all this really good predicate data on how do we actually park these, where are we underparked, where are we overparked, how are they actually living, are we losing, did we overpark it, how are the TOD being utilized? I mean, you might be kind of surprised to know that the TOD does not relieve a lot of parking for us, because it seems intuitively it would, but there are safety concerns with that. So you can't really rely on that either. So we'll always err on the side of being conservative and providing more parking as opposed to less. So when we started evaluating this, when we kind of took all those factors into the mix, it is a very auto-centric site, so we can't go low on parking. But we also know that when we look at our portfolio and how it's utilized parking-wise, and we look at kind of our third-party property management group is a national group. They have about 55,000 units, and we'll ask them to start evaluating across their portfolio what we're seeing in trends in Midwestern, suburban or quasi-suburban type deals. And so some of that, or some of that narrative was put in the study, so I think it's there kind of for your reading and informed that way. But a long way of saying if we underpark it, we're not doing well. And so I would say we are not creative at all when it comes to parking. We are very intentional when it comes to parking. And I think the reason we're okay with that condition of having those parallel stalls along the road, which is not ideal for our residents either, right? I mean, I don't think they'd be utilized from a public benefit standpoint, from infrastructure that's already going in, so that infrastructure is going to be there, right, just to open the master plan up. And so it's a nice utilization of that infrastructure investment. I don't think there's going to be a lot of public parking there, right? But I don't honestly think there's going to be a lot of our resident parking there either, because that wouldn't be an ideal condition. I think for us, kind of the perfect condition, except for some high peak, high traffic nights and weekend type stuff with a few visitor stalls, is going to be about what we have found, where the traffic study or the technical analysis coming in, what our portfolio is telling us in kind of the current environment, and what our national operator is kind of telling us in that 1.3 range, right? One per bedroom. And really what you find is, and I'm gonna get really technical now, it is truly kind of one per bedroom. About 10% or less of our one bedroom units will have, you know, more than one resident living in it. So it's pretty de minimis as far as you don't see a lot of potential for a secondary car in the studios or the one bedrooms. That's a pretty, you know, it's pretty correlating there. In the larger units, in the two bedrooms, we're seeing about 25% of those two bedroom units will be utilized by a single occupant. And so we kind of, again, try to be careful with that and basically anticipate every bedroom gets a car. So that essentially says every two bedroom is going to have two cars associated with it, right? Just to be a little bit conservative there. But our internal data tells us a little bit differently, but I think safe. And then the three bedrooms are generally almost always a two car occupant or two car utilized unit, and of which we have, I think, 4 here to provide a little bit of diversity in that housing type and offered. So we wouldn't be in front of you if we felt like we were in any way underparked, because we do have that space. I mean, surface parking is not hard to erect, right? We could have advocated it early on in design to continue kind of eating into that green space. We love that green space. We want to, you know, potentially participate in activating it, programming it, doing farmers markets. Can we talk about a splash pad out there? You know, some of these kind of things to bring life to that. So we want that as some momentum and a nice amenity for the overall master plan. But there is that opportunity we could have advocated for. And I can stand here before you right now and say that we don't. Seeing a sea of parking in that probably would be very underutilized, I think would be a disappointing outcome, but we always have that opportunity, right? I mean, we can always pave over it.
So I guess that's what I'm saying. You could expand into that if you had to.
It would be the city's.
And you're not seeing with the rents are going up dramatically. And I know there's issues of rent control in St. Paul or whatever, but you're more knowledgeable on it than me. So you haven't seen any kind of trend where rents go up significantly and you're going to have two people in a one bedroom with two cars. You haven't seen any trends like that.
Not substantially.
Not yet.
One bedroom.
Okay.
No, or a studio. We haven't.
Well, the studio you kind of get, but one bedroom you think could have two.
People generally go without a car before they'll take on a roommate in a smaller unit, honestly. But, you know, every site is different. Sure.
Yeah, and I think that's more prevalent downtown still, right? If you're going to bunk up with someone, you're young enough to not mind doing that. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, we didn't get a chance. I mean, we didn't come forward during the public commentary section, but we certainly can go through some of our images and talk more about kind of how we got to where we got to, if you're interested in doing that. But I think that potential roommate scenario coming as rents continue to increase is certainly more of a core downtown concern, where you're seeing rents in the $3,000+ range that just aren't affordable. And the benefit of being further out in the suburbs is we don't have rents that high. We're still achievable and attainable to a larger group of folks.
Okay.
So you're marketing it renters by choice is one of them, and then empty nesters at the same time. What sort of price point on, you know, for example, a 2-bedroom?
Yeah, I can jump in right there. I mean, so basically when we first started looking at Victoria, 2018, 3 years ago now, 2019, we identified exactly, Chair, the demographic that you pointed out, right? 2040 comp plan helped us show that there was a smaller amount of population for the young folks, renters at will, renters by choice, and then potentially that 55+ age range. Our project is a market rate deal. Rents will be almost identical, competitive to the current rents at the Victoria Flats. A 2-bedroom rent would range, honestly. We haven't finalized exactly where it is because the rents won't be finalized until the project is built in 18 months or so. But right now, rents range anywhere from $1,350 on the smallest end and up to $2,650 plus if you're up on a 3-bedroom up on the corner overlooking Steger Lake, you know, essentially right there.
Okay, very good.
Isaac, can you pull up the parking? So on the proposed parking, you got parking on one side of the street in the green space. I'm going to say to the northwest. Why wouldn't you add like a double parking area on that on this northwest side? Or
I can answer that, Commissioner Kuhn, Chair, members of the Commission. I think it speaks to what was envisioned for this area and the lack of parking. They're showing spaces immediately adjacent to the building, in part because this is really the only building, as we look at this area, that would commonly use these parking spaces based on the development. It's slightly detached from the future area of downtown West, and then there's the Power Sports building to the south. So it's shown on one side of Steiger Lake Lane through the project proposal here this evening. On the remainder of the central green area and the expansion, part of the thought was there's added shared parking within that area. And if I jump back here and looking at the concept plan as a whole, coming down the line, resulting from potential development on this site, there's identification for future buildings 4 and 7 on the other side of this central green stormwater area. So the thought was, if the city is to provide shared parking through the feasibility study and infrastructure that's shown on this concept plan that was recognized, maintaining the ability to have available shared public parking in those areas is necessary, and avoiding a situation where it's chewed up by any one particular land use in downtown West. Does that answer your question? No? Long-winded answer.
I'm just trying to find more parking in the green space, but not pave the whole, green space area. Because if we pave that whole green space area, I think we're going to run into hardcover issues with the Mineral Watershed District. And I don't know, I assume they're still required some sort of hardcover requirements, or is the Central Business District completely exempt from hardcover? I don't, versus. Yeah. But I'm just in that C shape. You take your mouse just a little bit north or right there, why wouldn't you put another row of parking in that area, which would give you another dozen spots or whatever, which would be a little bit more additional parking for the common area, but not fill in that whole green space.
Commissioner Kuhn, Chair, members of the Commission, I could probably speak to that a bit. There's actually a pretty significant grade change from the top elevation of this central green area that's shown leading down to get out there. This central green parking space concept is subject to change, and really it's subject to change because presumably the city would control that central green space area. So based on the comments that are provided, if it's to be shared parking, if more parking is deemed necessary in that area, the layout of the spaces that are shown here could change, and that's been evaluated. I would say this is, there's been opportunity discussed to bring out in a different shape of parking coming out further and more linear along either side of the buildings, with the ability to do expandable parking. So there could be X amount of quantity shown on day one. If there's the need to expand public parking on that site, it could be potentially doubled by increasing a row. And there's been, the incorporation of permeable pavers in that area explored to meet that. We're not concerned about the stormwater requirement per se. I believe it's 80% in the central business district, and it is more or less an open space. But yeah, another long-winded answer.
We would certainly be supportive of expanding the parking along the front of the building if that was explored.
Could you give us an overview of the vision for your vision for the next phases of this 13.5?
Yeah, you want me to go or you go? Go ahead. Sure. So you want to go back to the master plan component? Although we don't have any current activity on any of these parcels, we are excited about this project, the first phase being the catalyst and getting the infrastructure in and driving additional traffic out there. Certainly, my background primarily is in commercial and retail real estate and development. Being along 5, as you see the larger building with the kind of bump out there adjacent to the ponds, that wants to be the retail node, honestly. He and I have talked a little bit more about, if you're familiar with the Total Wine and Lake Winds Co-op in Chanhassen, that smaller development that's got a little bit larger of an anchor and then a smaller kind of access drive pier component that kind of brings the traffic into more of the surface lot. What it does is a nice job of kind of shielding some of those surface stalls from the road, so you get the look of larger density up along the main highways, but then you get to what the retailers need. We've been working like dogs to try and get a retailer, a grocery store out here since the origin of the project. As recently as Monday, the answer has still been not yet. So if we do, you'll see us very quickly. But hopefully that is the case, that something comes in here and it drives additional traffic. We've talked to city staff about some additional potential retail interest in a smaller shop scale, smaller bays, strip mall capacity, potentially of need out there. I do think that main access drive that comes in will liken itself as you're going into that larger anchored development, whether it's a mixed use, large scale, 5 stories on top of one, or something smaller, like a 2-story, kind of like I referenced in the Chanhassen project, TBD. I do think that as you go along the contour of Steger, and as it's shown kind of in the row houses and then the L-shaped building back towards the preserve, that is where I think we would naturally put the housing projects anyways, and that's how it's designated this way. I think that will probably be common. I can't speak, Jen, you could probably speak better, or Isaac as well, as to what other developers or interest has been. We know some other folks that have been interested in potentially kicking tires. So my guess is that as these things become more real, those phone calls will increase pretty significantly. Of course, we'd love to be involved in all of it, but first step first.
Sure.
Can we take you back a little bit on the parking? There is a gap of your 177. This could be physical spaces within the building, and then this 43 units that we've come up with, filled presumably through street or parallel parking and this green space. And that gap is predicated on the ordinance revision that was proposed. So, well, we've been talking here, I've done some quick and dirty math, and hopefully my arithmetic works out well. With the vision of 1.5 units or 1.5 spaces for the units that are 1 bedroom or less, 2 units for a 2-bedroom, and then a half unit for essentially the 3 units. So, or in other words, I'm coming up with a number of 242 spaces versus the 220 of the ordinance that's proposed. So I feel that what we're seeing is, because we spent a pretty fair amount of time, as we've all observed from our last meeting, about how are we going to right size this ordinance revision should we do it. And I think we feel that the current ordinance is a little bit heavy on parking spaces and a little bit perhaps punitive to development. My proposal, I think, gets you in a good middle ground, and so my view is that we have about a 22 unit risk factor between what I recommended and the 220 and the size of the gap accordingly. So do we feel that in this green space, would there be enough room to get another 22 units in there comfortably, so that that would seem to be the development risk to the city? Because once this is done and that size, then it's wrong. If I'm hearing things correctly, hey, it sounds like the city's problem to address that parking problem, correct?
Well, we would certainly suffer punitive damage as well, right? I mean, we wouldn't be leasing spaces, which would drive the demand down. So the demand for the parking would match the leasing of the apartment. So
yeah, I agree.
We're trying to get to 100%, but we'd be at 82%
yeah,
and hemorrhaging money and
right,
be in a bad spot.
I mean, it feels like, yes, I don't disagree with that statement. But it is a lag effect, right? It does take a while for that to flush its way out between the aggravation factor and saying, I'm moving out of here, and, you know, the real problem that is at hand, that people can't park. So, I mean, I think if there is, you know, like some buy-in on this risk, which I feel is like 22 units, do we have space where we just have the single row of diagonal parking that faces the Carver Park Reserve? I mean, I can't point it out, but I mean, I guess Isaac, yeah, right there. I mean, would we feel that there's enough room in there to not to expand that, to put a few more spaces in there and not really compromise the green space, not compromise the project, not create too difficult of a barrier?
Commissioner Vansky, chair, members of the commission, it's the use of that green space is based on what the city's consensus is for what that should be. I believe, and I won't pretend to have been here for the whole visioning of that, but as Tim mentioned, there's been contemplation of, you know, Veterans Park doing splash pad, whatever, through there, but really the driver was to try to preserve that space. So if there's an identified need that, hey, we need more parking in this space, there's certainly the ability to do that. It may change what the long-term use of the space is. That could be evaluated. If there's an identification that, hey, we think half of these spaces on one side will primarily be used just by the physical nature of where they are, dedicating that to one side of the development and whatever's on the north side here going to the north side of the development. I think there's certainly potential to review what that could look like and identify what that is in looking at the city's review of what's desired and anticipated and envisioned there, and what makes sense for the adjacent development. So to answer your question, yes, my impression is that it should be, and the parking that's located on there should serve the adjacent development and any public function that's desired on that site. So identifying what that is needed.
May I add a comment, Mr. Chair, commission members? So just brainstorming here. The one-way traffic that's shown in the C area is necessary when you have two spines of parking, right? So nobody goes back out the inn. At the single spine level, potentially, speak out of turn, engineer, and Isaac and city staff, maybe we make those 90-degree stalls. You probably get 2 or 3 more in that top spine. We would be open to, and maybe this is all hypothetical, if there is in fact a traffic problem or a parking problem in the future, we could expand the parking along the side of the building that's closest to ours. And what we looked at before, and I don't remember Katie from Kimley Horn, but we could get this information back to city staff, where it's parallel in front of the kind of main access point, we could look at adding pull-in stalls there. I think there was a net positive when we looked at that before, but we were a little bit more concerned about backing up into traffic on that side of Steger as it goes into the major portion, the rest of the master plan development. But in that scenario, off the top of my head, maybe we could get another 15 or so. I mean, we could certainly do that math and figure out if we're close enough to that 22. You know, I guess we still feel like that's a lot, but if that ends up being the number that, you know, commission and council go forward with, we can figure out a way potentially on how close we can get so we can actually quantify, as you said, Commissioner Vansky, what that city risk is from a parking perspective. And it doesn't need to be implemented today, but from a development standpoint, you know, if push came to shove, that'd be at least a nice option for us if we did get into a scenario where everybody got a roommate, that we had the opportunity to expand that parking.
Well, you don't want to take all the green spaces. Isn't that where people are going to walk their dogs?
Right here?
Yeah,
well,
are they going to walk
back? We got this nice big dog park on the back too. And
oh, is there? Okay.
Action, and so.
Got it.
Lakes, parks, cars, and dogs.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so this is a photo. This was part of our earlier opportunity we missed to jump up during the public commentary to kind of talk through some of the vision for the project. What we wanted to do as part of our early vision is try and connect indoor and outdoor and grasp the natural activities, the outdoor activities that Victoria offers, and connect them back to apartment living. We've got nice big windows that we would do in a downtown project to bring in a lot of natural light. We've got a nice pool that overlooks the lake. Lots of different seating options, indoor, outdoor space on the kind of far right side with that white and gray checkerboard. That's the fitness that comes in and out. Some grilling stations, a pickleball court on there as well, and the dog park down on the kind of bottom left there, just a fenced-in area that's a dog run. Yeah. The one thing that Mark mentioned too is our management company does a really, really nice job. We've got other projects we can share examples of incorporating local businesses and local residents into the project. So although the building you know, opens up to the city or to the street, and the amenity profile opens up to the lake, there's ways to create opportunities for folks to come in, whether it's a pickleball tournament, whether it's on the front side, there's kind of a pre-function space that has a patio on the front that's right next to the green, so you could have some additional shaded seating there. You could bring in, we could do wine tastings, we can do pet grooming. It's a benefit for the residents, it's a benefit for the community members, the citizens to come in and create that indoor-outdoor space.
Is a nice development, and I can't speak for everyone, but I don't think any one of us want to not see this move forward due to 8 or 10 parking spaces, right? I think this would be a nice addition to our community.
We are here to make it work somehow or another within the confines. Any other thoughts on any other discussion items? Hearing none, I would ask for a motion.
Are we allowed to do a motion with the public hearing still open?
Commissioner Pedersen, Chair, members of the Commission, you are certainly allowed to make a recommendation at tonight's meeting. We will come back.
Yeah.
And, you know,
You're
barring
right.
any significant comments or whatever comments provided, you'd then be able to either make a new recommendation or just acknowledge that the recommendation still stands. I guess one point of clarification on this project, if the commission is to recommend approval or denial, simply stating any additional recommended conditions of approval would be helpful, particularly as it relates to the parking discussion, just so we're all jiving on the same page.
So recommending with the recommendation of a variance to the CBD's parking ordinance of 2.0 spots per unit or bedroom.
Commissioner Pedersen, Chair, members of the Commission, I think if that was the desire of the Commission, you would note with the added condition of approval that the project and site receive a variance to be heard prior to final plat approval, at which point a variance would either be approved or denied based on what is proposed at that time and the rationale at that time.
That's what I would be comfortable with, because doing a full parking examination, which some of our current business leaders want done for an ordinance change, and I'm in total agreement with them, is going to take a lot longer and will push this project out. I mean, what is a parking evaluation going to take? 3 months?
Ooh, Commissioner Pedersen, Chair, members of the Commission, I would anticipate, depending on the scope of whatever parking study is identified, utilization counts, all that jazz for the greater central business district, we're looking at probably 6 months to a year just for public engagement through that. Mr. Wortman knows, I can't remember how long the last one took. I would say at least 12 months. So yeah, it would be a long.
I mean, that's the timeline we're looking at before we would have a comfortable city ordinance change with support from our current business owners. I think, moving this forward with a recommendation for a variance is kind of the only way to go.
Are we in agreement with that?
Yes.
Any opposed?
No.
I guess that was a motion.
It sounds like you got it.
No, not a motion, a recommendation.
A recommendation of a motion for possible consideration.
Yep. And the motion will occur Monday.
Got it.
At the close of the public hearing. Very good. Very good. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Thank you. Miscellaneous items. Is there a review? Does anyone have a review of City Council meeting? Hearing none. I'll be at the next City Council meeting, so that'll be taken care of. We have a conflict on our August 2nd Planning Commission meeting, which is National Night Out, or Night to Unite. So we'll have to address that.
Chair, members of the Commission, I may recommend, just because we're bumping up a meeting for July 25th, if the Commission was so obliged. We have no active permits unless a discussion item was desired for the Commission to review, to take a break on that August 2nd meeting and potentially not have a meeting on August 2nd. I know you guys have been hard at work this summer with a lot of active development and everything going, so the choice is yours. Otherwise, we can always find something to bring in, chat through.
Sounds good. Makes sense. The other item that I had jotted down here was Dana Hardy's response to Victoria Acres. Did everyone see the response that she had?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Chair, members of the Commission, if I may just project to the public, there's a recent inquiry about the status of the Victoria Acres project, inquiring if there had been any activity or development on the Victoria Acres vision. The answer to that question is no. There has been no discussion about advancing that project or any update beyond what was presented in March. So just to note that at the meeting.
So is the project dead?
no action at this time.
That's accurate.
That's different than dead.
Resting.
Staff, any closing thoughts, statements?
I have one closing thought for the chair and members of the commission. This is actually Jen Brewington's first planning commission meeting. Jen joins us, has been with the city for, feels like longer than a month, but about a month, and she's seen a lot of action and activity in that time period. But just in an introduction to those who haven't met Jen, and Jen's been meeting a lot of people in the community, but what a fun first meeting to be.
Excellent. Looking forward to working with you. Thank you.
Well, welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
Things are not this disorderly.
Commissioners, any other thoughts, any concerns, any issues? I mean, we have to have one or two, don't we? Any other final items? If not, I would call for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We are officially adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you for